You get your genetic test results back, you see MTHFR, and you start the methylated vitamins, and suddenly your heart's racing, your sleep is wrecked, or you feel worse than before. So now you're thinking, did I mess something up, or is my body just too sensitive? Here's what most people don't hear. Having a genetic variant doesn't tell you what your body actually needs. It just tells you where to start asking deeper and better questions. I'm Dr. Kenny, root cause health detective and IFM-certified functional medicine practitioner, and I see this pattern constantly around methylation. In this video, I'll show you how to approach methylation supplements safely, especially if MTHFR is part of your story. And if this type of content hits close to home, tapping the like button helps this reach other people who are stuck in the same cycle. So please and thank you. Let's start with a clear definition of methylation. At its core, methylation is your body's way of activating and regulating functional pathways throughout the body. Detoxification, producing your neurotransmitters, DNA repair, inflammation control, the list goes on. And it's happening millions of times per second, and it requires active B vitamins to run smoothly. Now, MTHFR is one specific gene that's gotten a lot of attention. It basically helps to convert folate into its active form so that the body can use it in processes like methylation. But here's what most people do miss about this conversation. MTHFR does not just affect folate. It influences other B vitamin pathways, including B6 and B12, which become an important part of the conversation. When a B vitamin such as folate gets disrupted in terms of its usability, it creates a cascade throughout your systems because everything is connected. They work together in tightly connected metabolic processes. And here's why methylation and MTHFR even matter. Roughly 30 to 40% of the world population carry a genetic variant that makes this conversion less efficient. And methylation touches many systems: your heart health, your mood and energy, healthy aging, the list goes on. When people see an MTHFR variant on a test and start taking methylated B vitamins right away, they can feel worse, and that's because we're not giving it context to what's going on in the systems around this genetic variant. If you've reacted strongly to a methylation supplement before, which we'll go into in a minute, you're definitely not alone. I see this regularly in clinical practice, and the truth is that your reaction isn't a sign that you're broken or overly sensitive even. It means that one part of this deeply interconnected system is getting activated before the rest are ready to keep up with it. Think of it this way. If you open a floodgate on a river that hasn't been widened further downstream, the water has nowhere to go. The pressure builds, and that's what's happening inside of your cells when methylation accelerates faster than the rest of your pathways, your detox, your nervous system, your mineral reserves can support it. So to reframe supplement reactions, when we view them as signals instead of failures of the systems or oversensitivities, everything changes because you move from what's wrong with me to what is my system trying to tell me. And here's what your system's trying to say. The problem isn't the supplement itself. It's that your foundation wasn't stable in the systems underneath. If your stress hormones are elevated, or there's hidden sources of chronic inflammation, or roadblocks in your detox pathways, adding a methylation supplement is like throwing water onto a grease fire. You're just accelerating a system that wasn't ready for the speed. And on the other side of these deeper questions lives understanding and confidence and regaining control when it comes to healing. The reality is, with the wellness trends and the marketing language, that when someone sees MTHFR on their genetic tests, they'll immediately start a methylated B vitamin supplement, and that's exactly backwards. It's probably because of the word gene mutation used as well, but seeing a gene variant on a test doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. There's a negative connotation there. And it doesn't mean that your pathways aren't functioning automatically. And it definitely doesn't tell you what dose of any kind of a supplement that you need. Let's think of MTHFR as a slower cashier at a grocery store. And no hate, because I used to be one, so thank y'all for your service. But if the rest of the store is calm, You barely notice that slower cashier. If it's packed or on a holiday, that slower checkout becomes a huge bottleneck in the process. The gene is not the problem in MTHFR. The context around it is what matters and creates impact. Before we move on to the next point, let's talk about homocysteine briefly. Homocysteine is a lab marker that reveals methylation backups in your lab results. And a large study found that people with a specific MTHFR gene variant, the 677C to T variant in case you're interested, only developed higher homocysteine when their B vitamin status was actually low. What this means is that the gene variant only mattered in the context of a system that was already depleted. In functional medicine, we don't look at genes in isolation. We look at patterns. Genetics are not black and white like we thought they were in the 80s and the 90s. They're volume knobs that get turned up or turned down based on your environment, your stress levels, your nutrient status, inflammation load. And a way this manifests in real life is that two patients with the same MTHFR gene variant, one can feel amazing and the other can't tolerate a supplement like methylfolate, for instance. But the difference is that the one who could tolerate it had stable blood sugar, better sleep habits, and low inflammation load overall. The other had nervous system dysregulation, gut dysfunction, and depleted nutrient status in general. So the same gene, but a very different expression. So having the MTHFR variant doesn't automatically mean that you need methylation support. It means that you need to prepare your system first, because if your nervous system is dysregulated, if your gut is inflamed, or your minerals or nutrients are depleted, adding methylfolate is like turning up the volume on a speaker that's been distorted. And this is why order also matters. Most people start with folate because that's what the F stands for in MTHFR. But you need to understand why folate feels so intense on a system that's not ready for it. In a nutshell, folate speeds up methylation. It's a huge green light signal for this process. But if your downstream pathways are sluggish or backed up and depleted, that push down the methylation pathway can feel like anxiety, insomnia, irritability, or that wired but tired feeling that's often associated with folate on a stressed out system. It's like pressing the gas pedal when your engine hasn't even fully warmed up in the winter. You amplify instability inside of the system. So the question isn't, is folate bad? It's, is the system prepared for the new speed? Folate becomes a lot more tolerated and safer when the foundation underneath is in place, and we'll talk about that very shortly. This is where functional testing becomes a valuable asset as well. An organic acids test, for instance, can show a snapshot of your metabolic exits and how they're functioning. Are there roadblocks that are occurring in this important chemistry? So a small shift in timing or sequencing can turn a reaction into a much smoother response and even a health-promoting one. And by the way, if you'd like to see the research that I compiled for today's video, I've put together a short, digestible research summary that does exactly that. It sends you to the sources, but also contains my little digestible bits of how this might apply to your life and asks you some questions to consider around methylation. If you're interested, it's in the pinned comment and the description below. To simplify this next idea, if you start with folate before you stabilize your B12 status, reactions are almost guaranteed to occur, and here's why. B12 is one of those nutrients that hides in plain sight. You might have been told that your levels are normal, but what matters is what's happening inside of the cells themselves, not just the number that's on your blood lab report. What most people don't realize is B12 is the scaffolding that holds in place the entire methylation system and keeps it stable. When B12 status is weak or depleted, everything built on top of that becomes unstable. And that's exactly why people react to folate alone, because their B12 foundation isn't strong enough to support the increased demand placed on the systems. A recent clinical trial showed something critical. Methylfolate, or the active form of folate, B6 and B12 don't work well in isolation. They function as a coordinated team. When researchers gave all three together in the right sequence and in the right amounts, participants had significantly better outcomes than when using folate alone. And this is another reason why testing matters. There's a very simple marker that's available as a urine test even called methylmalonic acid, or MMA. It's basically your B12 check engine light, and it shows whether B12 is actually reaching the cells and doing its job there. Serum B12, which is the normal lab marker in conventional blood labs, can look normal while your methylmalonic acid is actually struggling. So B12 status becomes a major lever when we talk about methylation support. The same person and the same dose has a completely different response, and individual personalization matters. And here's what I see in clinic is that when we stabilize B12, oftentimes folate-type reactions start to disappear. So never underestimate the power of your functional B12 status. Let's turn our attention to another important vitamin, B6. And this is in almost every methylation formula, and that's exactly the problem. B6 has many functions. It influences your serotonin and dopamine pathways, as well as that homocysteine breakdown. Even small changes in dosing of vitamin B6 can create large shifts in how you feel. You can be more anxious, more wired, or strangely emotional as well. B6 is different than the other B vitamins in that you can actually reach toxic levels and pretty quickly too. What catches most people off guard with vitamin B6 is because it's in so many different formulas, whether it's bundled in a multivitamin or a B complex or a methylation support supplement, suddenly you're at the 50 to 100 milligrams cumulative dose when your system really only needs 5 to 10, depending on the person, to really get through an average functional day. And when taken at higher levels, especially taken daily over weeks to months at a time, B6 can irritate your nerves, it can cause sensation changes, and actually paradoxical anxiety rather than the relief that is advertised. Functionally speaking, B6 is involved in many different reactions. It sits at this intersection between your neurotransmitters as well as your sulfur pathways and detoxification. When stress is particularly high or your detox pathways are overwhelmed or sluggish, B6 becomes more reactive as well. This just amplifies the noise in a stressed out system. So it's not about avoiding B6 altogether, but it is about the right sizing and the Goldilocks principle. The next supplement, before you ever take SAMe, there's one question that you must answer, or the reaction is also entirely predictable. That big question is your nervous system stable? SAMe can be incredibly effective, especially when used in the right amount and in the right setting. But if your nervous system is already running hot from stress and in that fight or flight mode from poor sleep or chronic low-grade hidden inflammation, SAMe can amplify everything further. This is the pattern I typically see with SAMe when someone reacts. If you start SAMe and you feel amazing for 3 to 4 days, your energy may be getting a little bit better, your mood lifting, the brain fog changing slightly. Then suddenly, after about day 4, day 5, they're wired or anxious or they can't sleep. The SAMe didn't change, but the system was not ready for that sustained level of activation and openness in these systems. Here's what's actually happening in the chemistry behind the scenes. SAMe accelerates methylation faster than almost any other nutrient. It is known as the universal methyl donor. If your detox pathways are backed up or your B12 status isn't stable, this acceleration creates additional pressure instead of flow in the systems. So if SAMe has ever felt too strong, it doesn't mean that it's not right. It means that it wasn't right yet. And the last methylation nutrient we'll talk about is TMG, or trimethylglycine, also goes by the name of betaine. This methylation tool is often gentler compared to folate or SAMe, but it can overwhelm your system just as easily if your exits aren't open. TMG supports an alternative pathway for breaking down homocysteine. And that's the marker that we talked about earlier that is an indicator of backup in your methylation systems. But TMG only works smoothly when your body's downstream pathways are clear and open. You can think of this as methylation having multiple lanes on a highway. Folate powers one of those lanes. TMG powers another. And if you add more traffic to a second lane, but the exits are still clogged up, you haven't solved the problem of traffic. And this is where these bonus nutrients that I'm going to talk about next come in. They help your body with all the minutia of these chemical reactions beyond just talking about methylation supplements. And I see this when somebody adds a methylation support supplement. They think I'm supporting the pathways quite directly, right? But if the foundation and the support crew isn't stable, that can further add to the congestion in the system. So if ideal flow through the system is the main theme here, what keeps the whole system stable in the first place? This is the missing piece for many, where sensitive people, quote unquote, finally start to feel stable. And it's not from adding more methylated B vitamins. Minerals are the unsung heroes of methylation. They're not the fuel per se, but they are the infrastructure and the support crew that allows the fuel to work properly. For instance, magnesium steadies your nervous system and prevents that wired, overstimulated feeling, while zinc, quite underappreciated, supports the MTHFR enzyme directly, which helps to make it more efficient even if you have a genetic variant. And choline provides a sort of pressure valve. It's an alternative route where the main pathways get congested. So practically, if someone comes in reacting to a methylation supplement that they've tried, we pull back, we test their mineral status oftentimes and find depleted magnesium, zinc, and barely adequate B2. When we stabilize those nutrients first, no folate, no SAMe, just the minerals and the cofactors, oftentimes after a couple weeks they can take the same methylating supplements they had before and not have any reactions. Same supplement, different terrain. If you want to know an accessible way to get some insight into this mineral status, red blood cell or RBC magnesium is a great blood test to ask for. Even your primary can run it. It shows your magnesium cellular reserves, not just what's floating around in your blood like a typical blood test. Magnesium in your serum, or a standard conventional lab, can look normal while your cells are actually depleted. Another piece a lot of people don't give a lot of attention to is that your diet may be pushing methylation harder than any supplement, and you might not realize it. Foods that are rich in methionine, a specific amino acid, that's red meat, eggs, dairy, and protein powders, they are the building blocks for methylation. In a healthy and balanced system, they support the process of methylation quite well. But in a stressed out or overly depleted system, they can be like throwing kindling onto an already hot fire. What you eat is not the problem, it's how your system is prepared for it that is the real story. And another thing to remember around MTHFR and genetics in general is genes aren't the problem. Your daily rhythm decides whether or not those genes whisper or shout on an entire spectrum of function to dysfunction. Supplements can help, but they don't override stress chemistry, sleep quality, hidden sources of inflammation, and toxic exposure over time, and these all shape how methylation behaves in real time. Research shows that even in older adults, B12 and folate status can shift your DNA methylation. This is essentially how your genes dial up and dial down over time. But that only happens when the system is stable enough to respond. With all this complexity, how do you make a confident next step is a question I get all the time. And here's the moment that people finally stop guessing and start making real progress. Sometimes the smartest thing to do is to pause, observe, let the noise clear in the marketing language out there, and realize that not every reaction requires a new supplement. Turning to objective lab data can be a really great way to see how your methylation status is actually functionally expressing itself. We talked about markers like homocysteine or methylmalonic acid and organic acids testing at large that give snapshots into your functional B vitamin status and beyond. These map that terrain that is so important in whether or not you're expressing methylation deficits or not. This is where grounding your genetic data into objective functional lab data can make room for precision. And with that precision comes confidence and predictability when it comes to treatment. And if you ever want my eyes on your case, I offer a free health mystery map call to Prospects in Texas, California, and Florida, where I practice. It's virtual, it's a quick discussion about your case. There's a link in the description below. And if you want to get even more out of your supplements and stop wasting money on the ones that aren't working for you, check out this video here where I go over my 3T framework for strategic supplementation so that you're really getting what you pay for. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.